Hi, I'm Andy Tate, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to Rome, Italy.
Don't tell me you're not supposed to tell.
The Trevi Fountain is the most famous fountain in all of Rome, and perhaps in the world. It's also one of the most massive and ornate fountains on the planet. The name Trevi means three ways, and is said to refer to the junction of three roads. Trevi Fountain is situated at the end of the Aqua Virgo, an aqueduct constructed in 19 BC by General Marcus Agrippa. The aqueduct brings water all the way from the Solani Springs several miles from Rome, and supplies the fountains in the historic center of Rome with water. In 1732, Pope Clement XII commissioned Nicola Salvi to create a large fountain at the Trevi Square to replace an existing smaller fountain. Salvi based his masterpiece on a previous Bernini design. The contest to design the fountain was won by Alessandro Galilei over Nicola Salvi. However, as Galilei was from Florence and Salvi from Rome, outcry in the capital led to the commission being given to Salvi. Unfortunately, he never saw his monumental Baroque fountain completed. The Trevi Fountain was inaugurated in 1762, 11 years after Salvi had passed away.
So we're here at the Trevi Fountain, Fontana di Trevi in Rome. And legend has it that if you throw a coin in the fountain, you will return to Rome one day. And it has worked for me because I was here over 20 years ago and now I'm back. But the way to do it is you put the coin in your right hand and you throw it behind your left shoulder. So let's see if this works. Are we ready? Here's the coin. Now I have another way of doing this. This is something new. I'm going to shot put this coin. Who said that was stupid? Come on.
I demonstrated one legend about throwing a coin into the fountain which ensures your return to Rome. But a second legend inspired the 1954 film Three Coins in the Trevi Fountain, which says that you must throw 3 coins into the fountain. The first guarantees your return to Rome, the second leads to a new romance, while the third will even lead to marriage. When the fountain is open, roughly 3,000 euros is thrown into it every day. The coins are collected every night and given to an Italian charity called Caritas. Caritas in turn uses the money for a supermarket program, giving rechargeable cards to Rome's needy to help them get groceries. The central figure in the fountain is the Greek sea god Oceanus, although many think it's Neptune. He rides a shell-shaped chariot that is pulled by 2 seahorses. Each seahorse is guided by a triton. The horse on the right is calm and obedient, the one on the left is hard to control. They symbolize the fluctuating moods of the sea. On the left side of Neptune is a statue representing abundance. The statue on the right represents salubrity, or the promotion of health. Above the 2 statues are bas-reliefs. The one on the left shows Agrippa, the general who built the aqueduct that carries the water to the fountain, as he explains his plan for the aqueduct to Augustus. The bas-relief on the right captures the moment the Virgin points to the source of the spring. Water flows over artificial rocks into a large semicircular basin that represents the sea. The fountain spills about 21 million gallons, or almost 3 million cubic feet of water every day, and is reused to supply several other Roman fountains. In the 1961 film La Dolce Vita, they shot a scene actually in the fountain basin itself that has come to be considered the most representative of all Italian cinema. In the scene, Anita Ekberg jumps into the fountain and invites co-star Marcello Mastroianni to join her.
Arrivederci, Trevi Fountain.
The Roman Forum was the religious, economic, and political center of ancient Rome. The valley that hosts the Roman Forum is protected by the 7 hills of Rome and was used since the 13th century BC by local tribes as a burial place. However, the valley was actually a marshy area. Since it had already become one of the main centers of Rome's life, the area needed to be reclaimed. The Romans dried the valley, and in the 7th century BC, they built an underground waterway to serve as a sewer, which is still in use today. The Forum was in use for approximately 1,400 years, from around 800 BC to 600 AD. Rome became a republic in 509 BC. Since then, the Forum was the center of life in ancient Rome. Here, triumphal processions took place, elections were held, and the Senate assembled. The Forum was filled with temples, basilicas, and triumphal arches, but most of the ancient buildings and sites in the Roman Forum were destroyed in 410 AD, around the time that the entire Roman Empire began to fall. This is one of my favorite places to visit in Rome, because I remember reading about it in elementary school. However, it's one thing to read about history, it's another thing to walk where history took place. Construction of the last of the large basilicas was started by Emperor Maxentius in 308 AD. After his defeat by Constantine during a battle in 312 AD, the Basilica of Maxentius was completed by Constantine. It consisted of a large central nave with enormous Corinthian columns. 3 triumphal arches were built on the Forum. They were used by emperors to commemorate their victories. Hardly any remains are left of the first one, constructed by Augustus in 29 BC. This is the Arch of Titus, a 1st century AD arch located just to the southeast of the Roman Forum. It was constructed in 82 AD by the Emperor Domitian shortly after the death of his older brother Titus to commemorate Titus's victories, including the siege of Jerusalem when Jerusalem was sacked and the riches of its temple were stolen. The inscription on the west side describes the refurbishment of the monument by Pope Pius VII in 1821 AD. One panel shows the start of Titus's victory triumph procession with the participants carrying booty from the Temple of Jerusalem after the sacking of the city. The booty includes a 7-branch candelabra or menorah, silver trumpets, and perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant. The menorah depicted on the arch served as the model for the menorah used on the emblem of the State of Israel. Until the modern State of Israel was founded in 1948, Jews refused to walk under the arch due to an ancient ban placed on the monument by Rome's Jewish authorities. The ban was formally lifted in 1997. The other relief panel is carved in 3/4 view and is Titus riding a 4-horse chariot and shows him being crowned by a personification of victory. The goddess Roma stands in front, holding the bridle of one of the horses. The 2 figures to the right of the chariot are personifications of the people of Rome and the Senate. Running around the arch is a small frieze which depicts the whole triumphal procession. The interior vault contains a representation of Titus being carried to the heavens by an eagle. The arch has been a model for many triumphal arches erected since the 16th century, and most famously it's the inspiration for the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. The Temple of Romulus was built in the 4th century AD. The building is mostly intact due to its incorporation into a church. There is still a debate going on as to who the temple was dedicated to. For now, it's assumed that this temple was dedicated to the son of Maxentius, Valerius Romulus, who died at the age of 4 in 307 AD. The Temple of Antinous and Faustina was built in 141 AD by Emperor Antinous Pius to honor his deceased wife Faustina. After the death of the emperor 20 years later, the temple was rededicated to both Antinous and Faustina. One of the inscriptions says, "To the divine Antinous and to the divine Faustina by decree of the Senate." The deep grooves in the marble columns are attributed to attempts to tear down the columns, but they didn't budge. In the 7th century, the temple was converted into a church, which was rebuilt in 1601. The Curia was the location where the Senate assembled. The rectangular brick building could seat up to 200 senators. The original Curia was built by the 3rd king of Rome, although at another location. It burnt down 4 times, first in 80 BC, but it was rebuilt each time. After a fire in 53 BC, Caesar moved the Curia to the Roman Forum. The current building was constructed in 283 AD by Diocletian. In the 7th century, the Curia was turned into a church, which is a big reason why it is so well preserved. The Basilica Aemilia is the oldest basilica at the Forum. Originally built in 179 BC, the purpose of the basilica was to provide shelter so that business that normally took place outside could be carried out here in case of bad weather. It was last modified in 22 AD. At that time, the Great Marble Hall with 4 aisles incorporated a number of stores that housed public banks and money exchanges. The basilica was destroyed by fire during the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 AD. Only 3 of 8 pillars remain of the Temple of Castor and Pollux. The original temple was built in 484 BC. The current ruins date from its last reconstruction in the 6th century AD. The temple was built by the Roman dictator Regilensis, who vowed to build a temple if his army would beat the Tarquin kings, who previously ruled Rome. According to the legend, Castor and Pollux, mythological twin brothers, helped the Roman army to victory and announced the victory at the Forum. In Republican times, prior to the Roman Empire, the temple served as a meeting place for the Roman Senate, and from the middle of the 2nd century BC, the front of the podium served as the speaker's platform. During the imperial period, the temple housed the office for weights and measures, and was a depository for the state treasury. The circular Temple of Vesta dates back to the 4th century BC. The small temple is one of Rome's most important, as it was dedicated to the protectress of both the family and state. Here the Vestal Virgins guarded the sacred eternal flame, symbol of the eternal life of Rome. The virgins guarding the flame were chosen by the supreme religious authority of the state. The girls, who had to be aristocrats, had to serve for 30 years. In 54 BC, Julius Caesar started construction of the Basilica Julia. The basilica housed the civil law courts and shops and provided space for government offices and banking. In the 1st century, it also was used for sessions of the Centum Viri, Court of the Hundred, who presided over matters of inheritance. There were also several other courts where magistrates held tribunals. The large building was destroyed by fire in 9 BC, but rebuilt again 7 years later. After the fall of Rome, the basilica was sacked. Not much remains of it today, but you can still see clearly the floor plan. The column of Phocas is a 44-foot tall column and is the youngest column of the Forum. It wasn't part of any temple, but it is a monument built in honor of the Byzantine Emperor Phocas on the occasion of his visit to Rome. The Corinthian column was erected in 608 AD and was crowned with a gilded statue of Phocas. Phocas had murdered his predecessor, but he was later murdered himself.
So in back of me on the right is a little marble monument, and in that area it's called the Rostra. And in 44 BC, Marcus Antonius gave a famous speech at Julius Caesar's funeral, and he said famously, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your euros," or something like that.
Near the Capitoline, or Capitoline Hill, stands the Arch of Septimius Severus. It was built in 203 AD to commemorate the victory over the Parthians, who lived in what is today Iran and Iraq. The first temple of Saturn was built during the last years of the Etruscan kingdom. It was inaugurated at the beginning of the Republic in 497 BC. The current ruins date from 42 BC. The temple was used as the state treasury. It also housed the banners of the legions and the senatorial decrees. In 20 BC, a tall column was placed in front of the temple by Emperor Augustus, and all distances to Rome were measured from this column. This is Palatine Hill, which we will be visiting shortly. In the distance on Velian Hill is the Temple of Venus in Rome, which is ancient Rome's largest religious structure. It was designed by Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD and was dedicated to Roma, the personification of the city, and Venus, the divine ancestress of Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome. The Arch of Constantine, which is located next to the Colosseum, is the most recent of the 3 remaining imperial triumphal arches in Rome. After years of civil war, the victory of Constantine's army over the numerically superior army of Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD finally brought some peace to the Roman Empire. To commemorate this memorable victory, the Senate of Rome awarded Constantine a triumphal arch. It was dedicated just a few years later in 315 AD. Constantine believed that his improbable victory over Maxentius was the result of the help of the Christian God. As a result, during Constantine's reign, persecution of Christians ended, and Christianity became the official religion in the Roman Empire. He also moved the capital of the empire from Rome to Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, in 325 AD. Here are just a few of the many ruins on Palatine Hill. At the southern end, near Circus Maximus, are the remains of the palace of Septimius Severus, Roman emperor between 193 and 211 AD, and just north of the palace of Septimius Severus is the Stadium of Domitian's Palace. However, it is not clear if this area was actually a public or private stadium, or that it was used as a private imperial garden. The stadium was completed in 92 AD. All of the brickwork used to be covered with marble. Here we see the baths of Septimius Severus, which had 3 levels, one at ground level, one for seating, and one for the scenic view. The walls are part of the foundation for the baths. The House of Augustus dates back to the 1st century BC and was the home of Rome's first emperor, Augustus, and his wife Livia. Cascina Farnese is a two-story building built in the 16th century by the Farnese family. Cascina Farnese is one of the few Renaissance buildings and the only residential one that remain atop the Palatine Hill in Rome. This is the area containing the Domus Flavia. It was completed in 92 AD by Emperor Domitian. The term Domus Flavia is a modern designation used to describe the northwestern section of the palace, where the bulk of the large public rooms for entertaining and ceremony are concentrated. This is the center of the complex with a peristyle containing an octagonal island, which featured a garden, a pool, and fountains. Well, that ends the tour of the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into ancient Roman history. Hello, I'm Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and in this video, we're going to see what I would describe as eerie, creepy, surreal, bizarre, and unforgettable. We're going to see the underground catacombs of Rome, which includes the Capuchin Bone Chapel, the San Callisto Catacombs, and the multi-layered Basilica San Clemente. The first stop is the Capuchin Bone Chapel or Crypt. I've been to over 50 countries and have never seen anything like it. The Capuchin Crypt is a small space comprising several tiny chapels located beneath the Church of Our Lady of the Conception of the Capuchins, commissioned in 1626 by Pope Urban VIII, whose brother Antonio Barberini was a Capuchin friar. It contains the skeletal remains of 3,700 bodies believed to be Capuchin friars buried by their order. When the monks arrived at the church in 1631, moving from the old monastery, they brought 300 cartloads of deceased friars. Friar Michael of Bergamo oversaw the arrangement of the bones in the burial crypt. The soil in the crypt was brought from Jerusalem by order of Pope Urban VIII. In accordance with Capuchin law, which did not allow burials to take place within the churches of the friars, Father Michael designed an underground cemetery reserved for the burial of the friars directly beneath the chapels. There were 6 total rooms in the crypt, 5 of them featuring a unique artistic display of human bones believed to have been taken from the bodies of friars who had died between 1528 and 1870. We are going to see 4 of those rooms. The Crypt of the 3 Skeletons is the only room where you can see a skeleton in its entirety. 2 of the skeletons in the middle are those of young children, probably the Barberini children, whose family founded the friary and church. They are resting on hip bones, signifying that death can come at any time. The inscription under them says, "What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be." The skeleton on the ceiling is perhaps the infant princess Anna Barberini. In her right hand she holds a scythe, a symbol of death, and in her left hand holds the scales, symbolizing God's judgment on the good and evil performed in one's life. The side walls contain 2 wide arched niches with the bodies of 2 Capuchin friars lying on cushions made of bones. The walls of the niches are decorated with floral motifs made of ribs, vertebrae, and parts of knee bones. As you leave this room, you can see the design of bones shaped like a clock. The bones are composed of vertebrae, foot bones, and fingers. The single hour hand is a breastbone, marking the transitory hours of earthly time as if to show the continuity between time and eternity. The crypt of the leg bones and thigh bones features 2 severed mummified arms which cross one another to make the form of the Capuchin coat of arms, symbol of the Franciscan order. On the ground are 18 crosses designating 18 tombs. On each side are 4 niches with skeletons of Capuchin monks. The crypt of the pelvises has 1 monk on each side and 3 against the wall. The two at the sides are leaning forward under an upturned arch, while the middle one rests beneath a large canopy, which is made up of pelvises and is fringed with vertebrae. The crypt of the skulls contains two curved niches on the sides containing the bodies of two Capuchin friars in a resting position. The niches are made of arm and thigh bones supported by skulls. The back wall contains niches for the three standing Capuchin monks. In the central niche is an hourglass, winged with shoulder blades, reminding us that time flies. The crosses on the ground mark the tombs of 7 Capuchins. Before the Emperor Constantine, Christians were persecuted for their religion and literally had to go underground. In the 1st century, Rome's Christians did not have their own cemeteries. If they owned land, they buried their relatives there, otherwise they resorted to common cemeteries where pagans were also buried. In the first half of the 2nd century, as a result of various grants and donations, Christians started burying their dead underground. That is how the catacombs were founded. Many of them began and developed around family tombs, whose owners, newly converted Christians, did not reserve them to the members of the family, but opened them to their brethren in the faith. With the passage of time, these burial areas grew larger by gifts, or by the purchase of new properties, sometimes on the initiative of the church itself. Typical is the case of the catacombs of San Callisto, also known as St. Calixtus. The church directly took up the organization and administration of the cemetery. The catacombs of St. Calixtus were named after the deacon Calixtus, who at the beginning of the 3rd century was appointed by the Pope as the administrator of the cemetery, and so it became the official cemetery of the Church of Rome. He later became Pope Calixtus I. The catacombs form part of an ancient complex that occupies 90 acres and are 12 miles long. They go down 4 to 5 levels, and the ceiling can be up to 70 feet high. The occupancy was estimated to be about 500,000 bodies. When the barbarians invaded Italy and came to Rome, they destroyed a lot of monuments and sacked many places, including the catacombs. The popes were powerless to stop them, so they ordered the removal of relics to the city's churches at the beginning of the 9th century. After the transfer of the relics was complete, the catacombs of Rome were no longer visited, and many fell into disrepair and were forgotten. The catacombs of San Callisto were rediscovered by the Italian archaeologist Giovanni Battista in 1854. When he discovered the tunnels, he called them the Little Vatican, the central monument of all Christian cemeteries. The catacombs' most ancient parts includes the crypt of the popes, the crypt of St. Cecilia, and the crypt of the sacraments. The crypt of the popes is where 9 pontiffs and perhaps 8 representatives of the church hierarchy had been buried. 3 African bishops are buried here. At its peak, it would have held the remains of 16 popes and 50 martyrs. The crypt of the popes quickly filled up in the 4th century, causing other popes to be buried in related catacombs. Along its walls are the original Greek inscriptions for several pontiffs. In the far wall, Pope Sixtus II was also buried. In front of his tomb, Pope Damasus had carved an inscription. Damasus wanted to be buried here, but didn't want to disturb the ashes, so we don't know where he was actually buried. In the adjoining crypt is the grave of St. Cecilia, the patron saint of music, whose relics were removed by the Pope in 821. This is a replica statue of her. The cubicles, or crypt of the sacraments, is a family tomb with frescoes from the first half of the 3rd century, hinting at baptism, the Eucharist, and the resurrection of the flesh. The Basilica of San Clemente, or St. Clement, is a Roman Catholic minor basilica dedicated to Pope Clement I. The structure is actually a 3-tiered complex of buildings. What we see here is the basilica built just before the year 1100 during the height of the Middle Ages. Beneath this basilica is a 4th century basilica that had been converted out of the home of a Roman nobleman. Beneath that basilica is the foundation of a Republican-era villa and warehouse that had been destroyed in the Great Fire of 64 AD. Unfortunately, we only had time to see the top level. The current basilica was rebuilt in one campaign by Cardinal Anastasius in the 12th century. Renovations were done in the 18th century. Today it's one of the most richly adorned churches in Rome. The apse mosaic was created around the year 1200 and represents the cross as the tree of life. It's based on the resurrection of Christ after the crucifixion. Irish Dominicans have been the caretakers of San Clemente since 1667, when England outlawed the Irish Catholic Church and expelled the entire clergy. Pope Urban VIII gave them refuge at San Clemente, where they have remained, running a residence for priests studying and teaching in Rome. The Dominicans themselves conducted excavations in the 1950s in collaboration with Italian archaeology students. On one wall in the atrium is a plaque affixed by Pope Clement XI in 1715, praising the Basilica of San Clemente. Quote, "This ancient church has withstood the ravages of the centuries," end quote. Clement undertook restorations to the structure which he found dilapidated. The carved and gilded coffered ceilings fitted with paintings date from this time, as do the stucco decor and frescoes.
I am Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to Rome, Italy.
The Roman Colosseum is one of the most recognizable buildings in the world and attracts millions of tourists a year. It was built not only to provide entertainment for the people of Rome, but also to make a statement that the Roman Empire was second to none. Emperors used the Colosseum to entertain the public with free games. Those games were a symbol of prestige and power, and they were a way for an emperor to increase his popularity. The huge amphitheater was built on the site of an artificial lake, part of Emperor Nero's huge park in the center of Rome, which included a nearby giant statue of Nero that was named after the Colossus of Rhodes, hence the eventual name of Colosseum. The Colosseum could accommodate an estimated 50 to 70,000 spectators, who entered the building through about 80 numbered entrances, including 2 for the gladiators and 2 for the emperors. There were 110 drinking fountains and 2 restrooms. Above the ground are 4 stories. The first level was for VIPs, emperors, senators, and ambassadors, as well as Vestal virgins. The second level was for teachers, knights, basically wealthy people. The third level was for slaves and the lower class. Many seats were made out of marble. The top level had no seats and was reserved for women. Entrance was free, but tickets were used, made out of pottery shards or small bones. The building measures 617 by 512 feet, or 188 meters by 156 meters, and it reaches a height of more than 159 feet, or 48 meters. The structure was built with marble, and 160 larger-than-life statues adorn the arches on the upper floors. The arena floor is made out of wood and covered with sand. The Colosseum was covered with an enormous awning known as the velarium. This protected the spectators from the sun. It was attached to large poles on top of the Colosseum and anchored to the ground by large ropes. Roman sailors operated it and raised and lowered the awning like sails from a ship. Now, there were several myths that have been perpetuated by Hollywood movies, but according to some historians, many are only partially true or not true at all. Myth number 1. The Colosseum was always known as the Colosseum. Actually, the Colosseum was originally known as the Flavian Amphitheater and was the largest building of the era. Emperor Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, started construction of the Colosseum in 72 AD. It was completed in 80 AD, the year after Vespasian's death. The Colosseum was financed by the sale from Vespasian's sacking of Jerusalem, and 12 to 20,000 Jewish slaves built it using wooden cranes. Vespasian's son Titus led the celebration, 100-day games that marked the inauguration of the building, where some 9,000 wild animals were slaughtered. Another 11,000 were later killed as part of a 123-day festival held by the Emperor Trajan in the 2nd century AD. Myth number 2. All gladiators were slaves. In fact, not all gladiators were brought to the arena in chains. While most early combatants were conquered peoples and slaves who had committed crimes, grave inscriptions show that by the 1st century AD, the demographics had started to change. Lured by the thrill of battle and the roar of the crowds, scores of free men began voluntarily signing contracts with gladiator schools in the hope of winning glory and prize money. These freelance warriors were often desperate men or ex-soldiers skilled in fighting, but some were upper-class patricians, knights, or even senators, eager to demonstrate their warrior skills. Myth number 3. Gladiators always fought to the death. Hollywood movies and television shows often depict gladiatorial bouts as a bloody free-for-all, but most fights operated under fairly strict rules and regulations. Contests were typically single combat between two men of similar size and experience. Referees oversaw the action and probably stopped the fight as soon as one of the participants was seriously wounded. A match could even end in a stalemate if the crowd became bored by a long and drawn-out battle, and in rare cases, both warriors were allowed to leave the arena with honor if they put on an exciting show for the crowd. Furthermore, since gladiators were expensive to house, feed, and train, their promoters didn't want them to be needlessly killed. Trainers may have taught their fighters to wound, not kill, and the combatants may have taken it upon themselves to avoid seriously hurting their fellow gladiators. Nevertheless, the life of a gladiator was usually brutal and short. Most only lived to their mid-20s, and historians have estimated that somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 10 bouts left one of its participants dead. Myth number 4. Gladiators were always men. Actually, female slaves were regularly condemned to the arena alongside their male counterparts, but a few of them were free. Historians aren't sure when women first suited up to fight as gladiators, but by the 1st century AD they were a common sight. Myth number 5. Thumbs down meant that the emperor wanted the gladiator to be killed. If a gladiator was seriously wounded or threw down his weapon in defeat, his fate was left in the hands of the spectators. In contests held at the Colosseum, the emperor had the final say in whether the felled warrior lived or died, but rulers and fight organizers often let the people make the decision. Paintings and films often showed the throngs giving a thumbs down gesture when they wanted a disgraced gladiator to be finished off, but this may not be accurate. Some historians think the sign for death may have actually been the thumbs up, while a closed fist with two fingers extended, a thumbs down, or even a waved handkerchief might have signaled mercy. Whatever gesture was used, it was typically accompanied by cries of either "let him go" or "slay him." If the crowd willed it, the victorious gladiator would end the battle by stabbing his opponent between the shoulder blades or through the neck and into the heart. Myth number 6. Gladiators always fought wild animals. The Colosseum and other Roman arenas are often associated with gruesome animal hunts, but it was uncommon for the gladiators to be involved. Tangling with wild beasts was reserved for special classes of warrior who fought deer, ostriches, lions, crocodiles, bears, and even elephants. Animal hunts were typically the opening event at the games. While most animals were merely slaughtered for sport, others were trained to do tricks or even pitted against one another in fights. Wild animals also served as a popular form of execution. Convicted criminals and Christians were often thrown to ravenous dogs, lions, and bears as part of the day's entertainment. In the morning, men fought animals, at noon it was the execution of prisoners, and in the afternoon, man fought man. Myth number 7. Gladiators were seen as uncivilized brutes with no loyalty from the people. In reality, the gladiators won massive fame among the lower classes. Their portraits graced the walls of many public places. Children play with gladiator action figures made out of clay. They were also renowned for their ability to make Roman women swoon. The hypogeum literally means underground and refers to the vast network of rooms, cells, tunnels, and passages under the Colosseum. Below the ground were rooms with mechanical devices and cages containing wild animals. The cages could be hoisted by elevators, enabling the animals to appear in the middle of the arena through trapdoors. Lions, tigers, elephants, and even whales were used. One of the most surprising things to me was that mock naval battles were held at the Colosseum. They flooded the arena and brought in ships to stage these mock battles. The Colosseum saw 4 centuries of active use, until the struggles of the Western Roman Empire and the gradual change of public taste put an end to gladiatorial combats and other large public entertainment by the 6th century AD. Even by that time, the arena had suffered damage due to natural phenomena such as lightning and earthquakes. In fact, in 847 AD, the southern side of the Colosseum was felled by an earthquake. In the centuries to come, the Colosseum was abandoned completely, and the marble was reused for numerous building projects in Rome. Beginning in the 18th century, however, various popes sought to conserve the arena as a sacred Christian site, though it's in fact uncertain whether early Christian martyrs met their fate in the Colosseum, as has been speculated. By the 20th century, a combination of weather, natural disasters, neglect, and vandalism had destroyed nearly 2/3 of the original Colosseum, including all of the arena's marble seats and its decorative elements. Restoration efforts began in the 1990s and proceeded over the years, as the Colosseum continues to be a leading attraction for tourists from all over the world. Welcome to the Spanish Steps. The Spanish Steps' unique design and elegance originally made it a popular place for artists, painters, and poets. The artist's presence attracted many beautiful women to the area who were hoping to be used as models. This in turn attracted rich Romans and travelers. This tradition of the Spanish Steps as a meeting place has lived on ever since, which is a big reason why they are perhaps the most photographed attraction in Rome. The Spanish Steps are interesting for many reasons, but one of them is the fact that you can see Spanish, French, and Italian influence here. At the foot of the Spanish Steps lies the Piazza di Spagna, or Spanish Square. The long triangular square is named after the Spanish embassy to the Holy See. In the 17th century, the area around the embassy was even considered Spanish territory. This is the Colonna del Immacolata. The column was found in 1777 underneath a monastery. It was erected here in 1857 to commemorate the Immaculate Conception. It is now topped with a statue of Virgin Mary. The Piazza di Spagna is connected to the Trinità dei Monti, a French church situated atop a hill via a long staircase which is called the Scalinata della Trinità dei Monti, better known as the Spanish Steps. At the end of the 15th century, only a small chapel existed on the hill. In 1495, French King Louis XII commissioned the erection of a new church, replacing the chapel. Construction started in 1502 and dragged on for decades. The Trinità dei Monti was only consecrated in 1585 by Pope Sixtus V. The idea of connecting the church with the square below originates from the 17th century, when the French also planned a statue of King Louis XIV of France at the top of the staircase. Papal opposition caused the plans to be shelved until 1723, when the monumental staircase was built without the statue. Pope Innocent XIII appointed the Italian architect Francesco de Sanctis. He presented a design that satisfied both the French and the papacy, and a French diplomat funded the steps. Frankly, without the Trinità dei Monti at the top of the hill, the Spanish Steps simply won't be as picturesque as they are now. Alright, we're going to go up the Spanish Steps. I'm not going to count them. The elegant staircase consists of 135 steps over 12 different flights. However, if you try to count them yourself, you may reach the figure of 136. The drainage system is elevated and so is often mistaken for the first step. And we'll have a nice view from the top. Need to work out more. Hello, everyone. Okay. Oh wait, there's more? Oh, jeez. One Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Benedicto the 13th. Okay. But right now, let's get to the top. Okay. Okay. I've made it to the promised land. Here we are. I think I'm gonna pass out. Okay. Whew. Is everyone out of breath like me? Nice view. In front of the Spanish Steps stands the Fontana della Barcaccia, a fountain commissioned by Pope Urban VIII and designed and sculpted by Pietro Bernini, father of famous Baroque artist Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Some say that his son collaborated on the decoration. Bernini's design, which shows a flooded boat at the center of a basin, was inspired by the flooding of the Tiber in 1598, when a small boat was stranded here after the water subsided. The fountain was finished in 1627. And this is a very upscale street. They sell Rolex, Ferragamo, Prada, etc. The obelisk just in front of the church was originally located in the gardens of Sallust. In 1788, it was moved to its current location on request of Pope Pius VI. The hieroglyphs were copied from the obelisk on the Piazza del Popolo. Inside, several paintings decorate the different chapels. Among them are 2 works by Daniele da Volterra, a pupil of Michelangelo. This is the Descent from the Cross, circa 1545 and restored in 2004.
Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to Rome, Italy. So we are here at the Pantheon, one of the most famous buildings in Rome, and it's the oldest church in Rome, almost 2,000 years old. And originally, it was a gathering place and a worship place for pagan gods, and the Roman Catholic Church took it over around 600 AD. And it's been a church ever since, and you can actually still go to Mass inside the building.
The Pantheon is perhaps the best preserved ancient monument in Rome. It borders the Piazza della Rotonda, a rectangular square with an 18th century fountain crowned with an obelisk. The original fountain was designed by famous architect Giacomo della Porta in 1575 and sculpted out of marble by Leonardo Sormani. In 1711, Pope Clement XI requested that the fountain be modified and had a new layout designed. Before the current Pantheon was built, two other buildings occupied the same site but both burned down. The right-hand man of Emperor Augustus, Marcus Agrippa, built the first Pantheon in 27 BC, but it burned in the Great Fire of 80 AD. It was rebuilt by Emperor Domitian, but it was struck by lightning in 110 AD. In 118 AD, Emperor Hadrian ordered for the Pantheon to be rebuilt again, but this time in a totally different circular design. He designed it with a famous Greek architect, but the architect was executed by the emperor because of an argument about the design of the temple. It was completed 7 years later in 125 AD. The portico's 16 huge 60-ton columns were quarried in Egypt. They were transported all the way to Rome using barges and vessels. The columns support a triangle pediment with an inscription attributing the Pantheon to Marcus Agrippa. It is the only remnant from the original temple built by Agrippa, and it's believed that Hadrian left it as a gesture to his predecessor when he rebuilt the Pantheon.
One of the most interesting architectural highlights of the Pantheon is the dome, and you'll get a much better view when we go inside. What's interesting about this roof, it's the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, and the word unreinforced makes me a little nervous. And they used some new techniques to make this dome, one of which is that as they went higher, they used less concrete, so the walls were thinner at the top than they were at the bottom. The Pantheon dome was the largest dome in the world when it was built, surpassed in 1436 when the Florence Cathedral dome was constructed. The most important problem the Romans faced during the construction of the Pantheon was the massive weight of the large dome. In order to support it without proper reinforcement, as is common today, the thickness of the walls was gradually decreased as the height increased, as I mentioned before. The Romans also used a different type of concrete for the dome than for the walls. At the base, very thick 20-foot walls were constructed, but at the top of the dome, a lighter type of concrete was used, which was only 7.5 feet thick. Coffers were utilized in the ceiling and the opening at the top. Coffers are a series of sunken panels in the shape of a square octagon that help lighten the weight of the dome. The diameter of the dome is 142 feet or 43 meters. It's in perfect proportion with the Pantheon by the fact that the distance from the floor to the top of the dome is exactly equal to its diameter. The Pantheon contains 4 chapels featuring many frescoes, paintings, and sculptures. It also contains the tombs of famous Italian artists and kings. This is the tomb of the famous Italian artist Raphael, also known as Raphael Sanzio and Raphael Santi, hence Sante's tomb. Above Raphael's tomb is a sculpture of the Madonna del Sasso, Madonna of the Rock, created by Raphael's student Lorenzetto.
Damn it! It's Dante's tomb. It must be the chapel that he built. He's not buried in it, he designed it. The Demon's Hole. It's not an oculus, it's an undercroft. It's a crypt. This is the tomb of Italy's first king, Vittorio Emmanuel II, the man who united Italy. There's lots of history and architecture here, which is why the Pantheon should be high on your list of things to see in Rome. The square is built on the former stadium of Domitian, built by Emperor Domitian in 86 AD, and that's why it's a very long oval shape. Now the stadium actually had a larger arena than the Colosseum, and it was used mostly for festivals and sporting events. And then in the 15th century, the stadium was paved over to create a square, but there are still some remnants of the stadium around, and I don't know where they are, but they're here somewhere. Now, the largest fountain is the very famous Fountain of the Four Rivers, which is right there, and it's also known as the Fontana dei Quattro Fiumi. And it was constructed between 1647 and 1651 on the request of Pope Innocent X. And it was designed by Bernini. And Bernini was kind of the architect rock star of Italy. And he designed the Four Rivers fountain. And his full name was John Lorenzo Bernini. And he definitely was one of the masters of Italy. He was an Italian sculptor and architect. He lived from 1598 to 1680. And he not only designed several famous statues and fountains in Rome, but he also designed St. Peter's Square. So the fountain has four figures, and you can see they're pretty large. There's two of them here. Each figure represents a river from a different continent. So you have the Nile, the Ganges, the Danube, and the Rio de la Plata. And that represents the four continents through which the papal authority had spread. And this square has two other fountains on either side. One's pretty far away. And one's a little closer on this side. And you have the Neptune Fountain and the Moor Fountain. Now also in the square is a beautiful church, which is right here. And that is the Church of Sant'Agnese Agone. And it was commissioned in 1652 by Pope Innocent X. And it was built on a site where, according to legend, St. Agnes was stripped naked, but miraculously was saved from disgrace by extraordinary growth of hair. Interesting. Now, the front facade of the Baroque church was designed by Borromini, who was Bernini's main rival. Construction started about 2 years after the completion of Bernini's Fountain of the Four Rivers, and it was completed in 1670. And last night we went inside and we sat for a little bit of mass.
Tradimento e a questa scelta, noi vogliamo depositare la nostra fede nel Signore che continua, nonostante tutto, a rinnovare in ogni momento questo che è l'edificio di Dio.
And again, there's the Fountain of the Four Rivers. Now, this fountain doesn't seem familiar. It's from Angels and Demons. I remember when Tom Hanks jumped in the fountain and he saved the cardinal who turned out to be the Pope. All right, see if this sounds familiar. We will destroy your four pillars. We will brand your preferiti and sacrifice them on the altars of science. Then bring your church down upon you. Vatican City will be consumed by light, a shining star at the end of the path of illumination. So this was the fourth altar of science, water, if you had seen the movie. Here we can see three of the statues that represent rivers. The Ganges in Asia. This apathetic river god looks away from the light of the church, representing the spiritual ignorance of this land. The Danube in Europe. The most civilized and cultured of the figures, the Danube looks toward and embraces the light of the Lord. The Nile in Africa. Bernini depicts the Nile with its head covered because at that time the source of the river was unknown. Symbolically, this also refers to what the Catholic world saw as the dark ignorance of the pagan world. The sculpture has not yet seen the light of Christianity. Obelisks were seen as an allegory to the link between earth and heaven. At the top of the obelisk there is a dove, symbolizing the Holy Spirit and motif of the Pope that commissioned this piece. You'll also see them by the Pantheon, the Piazza del Popolo, the Spanish Steps, in St. Peter's Square, and many other places in Rome. Now, why was the fountain and church built here, you may ask? When Pope Innocent X came to power in the 17th century, he decided to transform the Piazza into a showcase for his family, the Pamfilis. The family palace, the Palazzo Pamfili, faced onto the Piazza, as did the church of which Innocent was the sponsor. It was unveiled with much fanfare amid protests because the people wanted bread, not a fountain, during a famine. In decorating the Piazza, Innocent X decided he also wanted to construct a fountain. This desire was partly logistical and partly personal. For one thing, there was a need to solve an unresolved problem of where the water from the Vergini aqueduct that fed the Trevi Fountain was to terminate. However, he also wanted a fountain of his own to overshadow the existing commissioned fountain in the Piazza. For the commission, Innocent X invited several artists to submit design proposals for a fountain and excluded Bernini from the invitation because Bernini had been wrongly blamed for causing cracks in the St. Peter's Basilica facade and bell tower. The design of the fountain was first commissioned to Borromini, but it was ultimately handed to his rival Bernini.
The original African Blue,
This is the fourth river god, the Rio de la Plata in the Americas. Although he throws his hands back in surprise, this representative of the newly converted lands has begun to see the light.
Hi, this is Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to Rome, Italy.
Welcome to St. Peter's Basilica and St. Peter's Square. We're going to first take a look at the exterior of St. Peter's Basilica, then see St. Peter's Square, and then go inside the Basilica and see the incredible works by the Renaissance masters. Millions of people come to St. Peter's and admire the dome, the facade, the statues, the mosaics, the monuments, and the sculptures. But without knowing the history and symbolism behind them, I don't think you can fully appreciate these incredible works of art. In this video, you're going to see and hear the story behind so many of these masterpieces. It is believed that over the last 2,000 years, more Christian pilgrims have visited Rome than any other city, including Jerusalem. Built on the site where Peter was crucified, St. Peter's Basilica continues to draw millions of Catholic pilgrims to Rome every year. Interestingly, St. Peter's Basilica is not even a cathedral or the official seat of the Pope. St. John Lateran is the mother church of the Roman Catholic Church, but because of the size of St. Peter's and its location next to the residence of the Pope, most of the church's most crucial ceremonies are held here instead. The church is built on Vatican Hill across the Tiber River from the historic center of Rome, but it wasn't the first church built here. The location is highly symbolic. This was the site where St. Peter, the chief apostle, died a martyr and where he was buried in 64 AD. St. Peter is considered the first pope, so it made perfect sense for the papacy to build the principal shrine of the Catholic Church here. In the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, decided to build a basilica on Vatican Hill at the site of a small shrine that marked the likely location of the tomb of St. Peter. Construction of the basilica started between 319 and 322 AD. It was finally completed around 349 AD. To facilitate the construction, part of the terrain was leveled, and the necropolis where St. Peter was originally buried was demolished. In the middle of the 15th century, the basilica was falling into ruin, and Pope Nicholas V ordered the restoration and enlargement of the church after plans by Bernardo Rossellino. After Nicholas V died, work was halted. At the request of Pope Paul V, the basilica was extended further into a true Latin cross plan by Carlo Maderno, who completed the main travertine facade in 1614. Maderno wanted the facade low enough so that the view of the dome was not obstructed. He also placed the massive columns against the walls instead of in front of the building, as Michelangelo had intended. The church was finally reconsecrated in 1626 by Pope Urban VIII, exactly 1,300 years after the consecration of the first church. The 149-foot-high facade is crowned with 19-foot-tall statues of Christ, John the Baptist, and the Apostles, except for St. Peter and St. Paul, who are at the foot of the steps. On either side are huge clocks supported by angels and decorated with ornaments and the papal crest. They were added in the late 18th century under the work of Giuseppe Valadiere. The one on the left shows the exact time in Rome, and the one on the right, which has a single hand, European Mean Time. They recall that the church lives on in time, and that Christ will be with her until the end of time. Beneath the clock on the left is the Campanone, or Great Bell of St. Peter's, which weighs 441 pounds. It was cast by Luigi Valadiere and blessed by Pius VI in 1786. It is rung at Christmas and Easter, and every time the Pope imparts the "to the city and to the world" blessing. Originally, two of Bernini's monumental towers were to stand on either side of the basilica. However, these towers were never executed above the line of the facade because it was discovered that the ground was not sufficiently stable to bear the weight. Instead, the Valadiere clocks were installed. The Latin inscription reads, "In honor of the Prince of the Apostles, Paul V Borghese, Supreme Roman Pontiff, in the year 1612, the 7th year of his pontificate." There are 9 loggias between the columns and the pilasters of the facade. In the center, the loggia of the Blessing stands out. It is from here that the election of the new pope is announced. Beneath this loggia is the famous high relief portraying the consignment of the keys by Ambrogio Bonvicino. It shows Jesus, who is saying to Peter, "I will entrust to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you declare bound on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you declare loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven." At the foot of the steps are 2 statues, on the left St. Peter and on the right St. Paul, sculpted in 1840 and erected there in 1847 by Pius IX, replacing 2 smaller statues. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica is the tallest dome in the world, rising to a height of 448 feet or 137 meters from the floor of the basilica to the top of the external cross. The domes of St. Paul's Cathedral in London and the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. were heavily influenced by its architecture. Pope Julius II wanted to crown the old basilica with a dome. He hired Italian architect Donato Bramante in 1506 to do the job, but Bramante and the Pope died before much could be built. Before his death, Bramante persuaded the Pope to order his rival Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel because he expected Michelangelo, a sculptor, to botch the job. He was wrong. In 1546, Michelangelo gained total control of the construction of St. Peter's Basilica but refused to be paid. Michelangelo designed the dome, and after he died, work was taken over by his pupil, Giacomo della Porta, who completed it in 1590. To support the giant dome, builders placed 3 iron rings within the masonry, but there was still too much tension which caused cracks at the dome's base. By the early 18th century, Vatican engineers had to add several more rings as an emergency fix. St. Peter's Square, which has an elliptical shape, was created in the mid-17th century by Italian master Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who laid it out during the pontificates of Alexander VII and Clement IX. The square is bordered by massive colonnades that symbolize outstretched arms. Bernini and his assistants sculpted the 140 statues of saints that grace the balustrades on the colonnades. The square is decorated with fountains and an Egyptian obelisk that was transported to Rome in 37 AD. You can attend the papal audience here every Wednesday if the Pope is in town. Every Sunday you can see and hear the Pope give blessings from the balcony of his apartment. The Pontifical Swiss Guard is a small force, about 135 soldiers, maintained by the Holy See that is responsible for the safety of the Pope. The Swiss Guard serves as the de facto military of Vatican City and is often referred to as the smallest army in the world. Established in 1506 under Pope Julius II, the Pontifical Swiss Guard is among the oldest military units in continuous operation. The dress uniform of blue, red, orange, and yellow has a distinctly Renaissance appearance. There are some who believe that Michelangelo designed the uniforms. He did not. The Swiss Guard is equipped with traditional weapons as well as with modern firearms and small arms. Recruits to the Guards must be unmarried Swiss Catholic males between 19 and 30 years of age who have completed basic training with the Swiss Armed Forces and must be over 5 foot 8.5 inches tall. This year, after over 500 years, the Swiss Guard will receive new and modernized helmets. There are several doors in St. Peter's Basilica. This is the Holy Door. In 1947, a competition was announced to create bronze doors to replace the wooden ones. The Holy Door was created by Vico Consorti from 1948 to 1950 and is comprised of 16 panels divided by the coat of arms of the 36 popes who celebrated the ordinary holy years. It is cemented shut and only open for Jubilee years, which occur every 25 years, the last one being in 2000. The door is also called the Door of the Great Pardon because its panels contain scenes of man's sin and his redemption through God's mercy. The atrium was designed by Carlo Maderno and was completed from 1608 to 1612. The vault or ceiling contains 32 scenes decorated in stucco made by Giovanni Battista Ricci. The scenes narrate the story of the apostles Peter and Paul. St. Peter's Basilica may be the most important church in Christianity, but once you enter its doors, you also realize that you're in one of the most magnificent museums in the world, with priceless works created by Renaissance masters like Michelangelo and Bernini over the course of 100 years. In fact, there was even a story about Pope John Paul II telling a tour guide that St. Peter's was becoming more of a museum than a church. The works of art are overwhelming to look at, but once you know the history behind them and their symbolism, you get a much better sense of what it all means. Now here's a surprise. Pretty much whenever you think you're seeing a painting, you're actually looking at a mosaic made up of tiny pieces of glass. The mosaics in the various chapels are based mostly on existing paintings. The Pieta, or the Pitti, is one of Michelangelo's early works. The sculpture was originally made for a French cardinal's funeral monument. Michelangelo purposely wanted to stress the youth of the Madonna, going against tradition. In the sculpture, she shows her grief for her son's death, who is gently lying in her arms, almost weightless. The figure of Christ does not bear any wounds as realists would have wanted. He represents the perfect humanity of God-man, not deformed by death or wounds. In 1972, a deranged Hungarian-born geologist, shouting, "I am Jesus Christ, I have risen from the dead," attacked the sculpture with a hammer, damaging Mary's arm and nose, parts of which had to be reconstructed. The holy water fonts were made from 1722 to 1725. They offer the holy water so that those who enter can make the sign of the cross in memory of their own baptism. The central nave is an extension made by Carlo Maderno in 1609. St. Peter's Basilica has an interior nave length of just over 693 feet, or 211 meters, covering an area of about 50,000 square feet, and it's large enough to hold 60,000 people. It used to be the largest Christian church in the world, but in 1989 it was exceeded in size by a church in the Ivory Coast, Africa. The papal altar is reserved for the Pope or someone designated by him. It faces east toward the rising sun. It was commissioned by Clement VIII to complete the already finished part of the new basilica. He consecrated the new altar in 1594. The four sides of the altar are standing on four pedestals of white marble. Rising above the altar is the 95-foot-high baldachin or baldacchino. The canopy masterpiece was created by Italian master Gian Lorenzo Bernini. It took him 9 years to make it, from 1624 to 1633, and it's made up of 100,000 pounds of bronze. The four 20-foot twisted columns are adorned with sprigs of olive and bay, among which the figures of cherubs appear. Inside the ciborium, or vessel, is a dove, the symbol of the Holy Spirit, and a burst of golden rays. Above the frieze on each capital, four angels offer garlands, while between them couples of smaller angels support the Pope's emblems: the keys, the tiara, the book, and the sword. The cross is set on a golden globe. The ancient tomb of St. Peter lies directly below the altar. In 1603, Clement VII commissioned Giuseppe Cesare to carry out the upper part of the dome decoration. He prepared cartoons from 1603 to 1612. His drawings were then simultaneously transposed into mosaic by the best mosaic artists of the period. Above the windows, the dome is decorated by majestic figures on 6 ascending levels. Starting at the bottom, the figures portray busts of the 16 popes buried in the basilica, majestic figures of Christ, the Virgin Mary, St. Joseph, St. John the Baptist, and various apostles. In the rectangular frames, angels bearing the instruments of Jesus' passion, the faces of cherubs in circular medallions, angels, the custodians of St. Peter's tomb, and additional faces of winged angels. Above the 96 figures is a blue sky with stars, and above it the lantern, at whose base is a Latin inscription: "To the glory of St. Peter, Pope Sixtus V in the year 1590, the 5th of his pontificate." At the very top is the figure of God the Father. Before Bramante, who was the original architect of the dome, died, Michelangelo had observed that the workmen were not properly mixing the material for the piers, which are solid supports that hold vertical pressure. The workers were adding too much sand in relation to the amount of cement that was used. Michelangelo reported this to Bramante, but Bramante refused to listen. Shortly after Bramante's death, cracks began to appear in the piers, but Michelangelo fixed the problem. Italian master painter and architect Raphael succeeded Bramante as the head architect from 1520 to 1546, but for most of this period, all work was blocked because of the economic difficulties of the church. This is the Cathedra Petri, Latin for the chair of St. Peter. It's also known as the throne of St. Peter. Every year on February 22nd, the church celebrates the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter to commemorate St. Peter's teaching in Rome. Already in the second half of the 18th century, an ancient wooden chair inlaid with ivory was traditionally held to be the episcopal chair on which St. Peter sat as he instructed the faithful in Rome. In fact, it is a throne in which fragments of acacia wood are visible, which could be part of the original chair of St. Peter, encased in oak and reinforced with iron bands. Pope Alexander VII commissioned Bernini to build a large monument which would give prominence to this ancient wooden chair. Bernini built a throne in gilded bronze, richly ornamented with bas-reliefs, in which the chair was enclosed, 2 pieces of furniture, one within the other. The base of the altar is made of black and white marble and red jasper. 4 large statues in gilded bronze surround the chair, which looks almost as if it were suspended amidst the clouds. The 2 outer statues are figures of 2 doctors of the Latin Church, St. Ambrose and St. Augustine. The two inner statues with bare heads are of two doctors of the Greek Church, St. Athanasius and St. John Chrysostom. Above the chair are two angels bearing the tiara and keys, symbols of the Roman pontiff's authority. On the chair are three bas-reliefs picked out in gold, which refer to the same number of gospel episodes: the consignment of the keys, feed my sheep, and the washing of the feet. The whole composition is crowned by the gilt and stucco Gloria, populated by a host of angels among rays of light and gigantic billowing clouds. The composition of Bernini's masterpiece leads us to imagine that we can see the celestial heavens. In their midst is the window of Bohemian glass, divided into 12 sections as a tribute to the 12 apostles. A brilliant dove stands out against it, the symbol of the Holy Spirit, the soul of the Church which he never ceases to help and to guide. On the bronze statue of St. Peter, created by Arnolfo di Cambrio around 1300, St. Peter's left hand holds the keys, his right hand is blessing. The right foot stretches out and has been worn by the kissing and touching of the faithful. Above the statue is a mosaic with a portrait of Pope Pius IX. He was the first pope in history to reign for 25 years, an anniversary which he celebrated in 1871. Only the Apostle Peter had guided the church for such a long time, and according to tradition, nobody could reign for more than a quarter of a century. The statue of St. Longinus was made by Bernini from 1629 to 1631 on a stucco model, and from 1635 to 1638 on the marble version. Longinus was a Roman soldier who served under Pontius Pilate. When Christ was crucified, it was the soldiers under his supervision who witnessed the crucifixion, which deeply affected Longinus. He believed in Christ. The saint is seen stretching his arms and holding in his right hand the spear which wounded the side of Jesus. Church tradition says that after wounding Christ, he received healing from an eye affliction when blood and water poured from the wound. Saint Sebastian is a Roman martyr, and this work represents his martyrdom. Under Emperor Diocletian, he and many others had been persecuted because of their Christian beliefs. He was known as a plague saint and was thought to have the power to ward off disease. Pope John Paul II died in 2005. His remains were moved to the chapel in 2011. The statue of Pius XII was commissioned by the cardinals he had created and was made by Francesco Messina in 1964. The Pope is shown blessing the faithful, clad in papal robes. His gesture also seems to express his desire to put an end to the evil of the Second World War, while his expression seems to reiterate his famous sentence, "Nothing is lost in peace, all can be lost with war." The name Altar of Transfiguration comes from the altarpiece with the Transfiguration of Jesus on Mount Tabor, made in mosaic after an original painting by Raphael. 6 artists took 9 years to finish the mosaic, finishing in 1767. There are episodes in succession narrated in Mark and Matthew's Gospels, the Transfiguration of Christ on Mount Tabor, and the recovery of the boy possessed by the devil. At the top, Christ frees himself in the light between Moses and Elijah in the presence of Peter, James, and John. This is the tomb of Pope Innocent XI, who lived from 1611 to 1689. He was known for lowering taxes in the Papal States and creating a surplus budget. Much of his reign was filled with tension with Louis XIV of France. The monument to Pope Leo XII is located above the entrance door to the Chapel of the Relics, later known as St. Nicholas's Chapel. The sculpture was made from 1835 to 1836 and represents the Pope standing and issuing his blessing during the Jubilee of 1825. The monument to Christina of Sweden was designed by Carlo Fontana in 1702. The Queen, who bravely converted to Catholicism and abdicated the throne, is shown in a gilt and bronze medallion supported by a crowned skull. The creation of the funeral monument to Pope Alexander VII was supervised by Bernini. It was commissioned by the Pope himself during the first years of his papacy, but he died in 1667 before the work even started. The door is actually a side exit leading into the Vatican State. Bernini transformed the door into a symbolic entrance to eternity by adding a puffed-up drapery raised by a skeleton holding an hourglass. Bernini didn't actually do the sculpting, but he worked out the plan, monitoring the sculptors who transferred his drawings to marble. He may have personally done the finishing touches of the Pope's face. The Innocent XII monument by Filippo della Valle features an urn with a statue of the Pope flanked by the allegorical figures of charity and justice, and crowned at the top by two angels which support the coat of arms. The mother holding her sleeping child pays tribute to the Pope, who always helped the poor. The funeral monument to the Countess Matilda of Canossa was made by Italian master sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini with the help of several collaborators and was commissioned by Pope Urban VIII in 1633. The Pope had a special memory of this heroic Middle Ages warrior woman and wanted to honor her. Her remains were transferred to St. Peter's Basilica in 1634. If the funeral monument to Pope Innocent VIII looks different from other monuments in St. Peter's, it's because it was the only one to be transferred from the old Basilica. It was moved here in 1621. However, when it was reassembled, the sarcophagus holding the Pope, previously on top, was now on the bottom. On the top monument, the Pope's left hand shows the lance that pierced Jesus' side. Next to the pontiff are four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. The upper lunette displays the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. The two statues are symbols of imperial majesty and the equalization of death which strikes all mortals alike. The chief concern of this pope was the promotion of peace among Christian princes. He also unsuccessfully advocated for a great crusade. The sainted Pius X, son of a postman and a seamstress, radiated a holiness which deeply impressed those who came in contact with him. The ordinary Italian people hailed him as a saint, a verdict that was confirmed by the Church 40 years after his death. The monument to St. Pius X was planned by the architect Florestano da Fausto and carved by the sculptor Pietro Astori in 1923. The pontiff, carved from the whitest marble, is shown standing, his arms outstretched to the faithful. Around the door and on its panels are beautiful bas-reliefs in bronze, illuminated with gold, recalling episodes from the saint's life. The altarpiece mosaic is the presentation of the Virgin Mary in the temple by her parents. She is portrayed as a little girl joyfully going up the steps to the temple with her parents. She was brought there to be consecrated by God. In order to reach the altars of holocausts, she would go up 15 steps, corresponding to the psalm sung by the Jews while going up the stairs. Mary went up on her own, never looking back at her parents. St. Pius X was the last pope to be canonized. He was a great pope of the 20th century and was known for vigorously opposing modernist interpretations of Catholic doctrine, promoting liturgical reforms in Orthodox theology. He helped restore Christian life by issuing wise laws on the religious education of children, youths, and adults. His catechism gives clear answers to many religious questions. He allowed young children to take communion. The monument to Benedict XIV by Pietro Bracci represents the Pope rising from his throne to give his blessing. Below there are allegorical statues of sacred wisdom on the left and disinterestedness on the right. The first figure holds a book in her right hand and has a gilded sun on her breast. The second is flanked by a stout little angel who is offering for acceptance a cornucopia filled with jewels and money. The artist introduced an innovative feature for St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope is seen standing, emphatically giving a blessing which was in sharp contrast to the calm Pope. The act refers to the apostolic blessing given for the Jubilee of 1750. There are 39 so-called founder statues of men and women who founded religious foundations. Here are 4 of them. St. Bruno was created in 1744. The statue demonstrates the saint's refusal of the bishop's headgear and staff offered by a cherub, while his right hand rests on the skull, evoking mortality. St. Ignatius was a 16th century Spanish Basque Catholic priest who was an important force in the Counter-Reformation. St. Cajetan was born in 1487 and spent his life helping the sick and poor in Italy, even performing miracle cures on the sick. St. Juliana Falconeri was born in 1270 and founded the Religious Sisters of the Third Order of the Servites. She belonged to a noble family in Florence and cared for the sick on a daily basis. Since 2001, the altar of St. Jerome has been dedicated to Pope John XXIII. The altarpiece contains the Communion of St. Jerome mosaic from 1730, which is a copy of a painting. Beneath the altar is the body of Pope John XXIII. Prior to him becoming Pope, he had been involved in saving Jews during the Holocaust, and while he was Pope, he made efforts to modernize the Church. Empress St. Helen by Andrea Bolgi was unveiled before Urban VIII in 1640. Constantine's mother, who converted to Christianity and performed many acts of charity, is represented in a composed posture restrained by the draping. The large cross reminds us of the legend according to which St. Helen found the true cross of the Savior in Jerusalem. The Veronica by Francesco Mocchi was unveiled before Pope Urban VIII in 1640 after being worked on for 11 years. Perhaps he took his time because he wanted to, quote, sign his old age with a memorable work, unquote. According to tradition, this is a sedarium, which is Latin for a sweat cloth, used by a pious woman to wipe the blood on Christ's face during his ascent to the Calvary, and his face was imprinted on it. The altar of St. Leo the Great is placed between two black granite columns. He was the first pope to be buried in the ancient St. Peter's, and his remains were moved to this altar by Clement XI in 1715. Over the altar is the only marble altarpiece in the Basilica, which was done by Alessandro Algardi, who worked on it from 1645 to 1653. 5 marble blocks were used, and the story was divided into 2 sections: the scene in which the Pope stops Attila, and the supernatural meaning of the event in the presence of Saints Peter and Paul. Here we see St. Joseph standing near a Byzantine-style cathedra or bishop's throne with his son Jesus in his arms and a lily in bloom in his left hand. An angel flying down from the sky holds a scroll ornament where the mission given to God by Joseph is inscribed. It says, quote, "You will be over my house," end quote. A kneeling angel offers him the ship of the church while a young man holds out an olive branch. In 1605, Paul V moved the relics of 2 apostles under this altar. The monument to Pope Pius VIII by Pietro Tenerani features the Pope kneeling, accompanied by a statue of Christ enthroned with statues of Saints Peter and Paul. He was imprisoned in 1808 during the French domination of Italy for refusing to take the oath of allegiance to Napoleon. Under the monument is a door leading to the sacristy and Treasury Museum. In this passage is a list of all the popes buried in St. Peter's. Since 1608, the altar of St. Gregory the Great has been preserving the relics of the Holy Pope inside a marble sarcophagus. St. Gregory was the first to define the Pope as servant of God's servants. The mosaic represents a miracle of St. Gregory, done from 1770 to 1772, based on a 1627 painting. In the mosaic, Gregory gives a piece of cloth that was on the tomb of St. Peter to a group of princes who had asked him for some precious relics. They thought the relic was of little value and unhappily returned it to him. St. Gregory prayed, then asked for a knife and pierced the cloth, after which blood miraculously came out, which showed the princes just how important the relic was. The monument to Pope Pius VII, who was Pope from 1800 to 1823, is by Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen. Like his predecessor, Pius VII endured imprisonment by Napoleon. He restored the Jesuit order in 1814. His Secretary of State, Cardinal Consalvi, commissioned this monument by Thorvaldsen, who was the only Protestant sculptor in St. Peter's. The papal throne is flanked by two angels. At the sides, on separate bases, are Divine Fortitude, wearing a lion's skin and with her arms gathered to her breast, and Wisdom, crowned with oak leaves and with her eyes cast down. The altarpiece of the Altar of the Lie is a 1725 to 1726 mosaic work representing the punishment of the couple Ananias and Sapphira. It's based on a 1604 original painting. This altarpiece depicts the story in the Acts of the Apostles of the couple punished for withholding money that they had promised to the apostles and for lying to St. Peter. After lying to St. Peter, Sapphira fell to the ground before the apostle. In the background, two young men carried the dead body of her husband, Ananias. It is purposely placed in front of the priest as he leaves to celebrate Mass, a permanent reminder to him that he is called to give himself entirely to God and be a servant to his people, causing any priest to think twice about selfishly withholding from this promise. The Chapel of Baptism was designed by Carlo Fontana, who won a competition among 20 famous artists to design it. The main altarpiece mosaic from 1722 is a copy of an original painting by Murata. It represents the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. The baptismal font is still used on Sundays to administer the sacrament of baptism. The gilded cover rests on a sarcophagus cover used by the Emperor Otto II and is believed to come from the tomb of Emperor Hadrian. The monument to the Stuarts was planned as a pyramidal funeral monument and was finished in marble in 1829 by Antonio Canova. It celebrates the last three Stuarts of English royalty, James III and his two sons. Here are their busts, in addition to two angels who blow out the life flame with their upside-down torches, symbolizing the quiet Christian submission to death. Well, that's the end of our St. Peter's Basilica and St. Peter's Square tour. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching Andy's awesome adventures. The Sistine Chapel is the most famous chapel in the world. It's the private chapel of the Pope, and it's where new popes have been elected since 1492. A special chimney in the roof of the chapel broadcasts the results, white smoke indicating the election of a pope, and black smoke signaling that no candidate has yet received a two-thirds majority. The Sistine Chapel, Cappella Sistina in Italian, takes its name from the man who commissioned it, Pope Sixtus IV. Sixtus in Italian is Sisto. Sisto conducted the first Mass in the chapel on August 15, 1483. In 1508, Pope Julius II asked Michelangelo to repaint the ceiling. Michelangelo, who saw himself more as a sculptor than a painter, only reluctantly accepted. In fact, he was working on Pope Julius's tomb at the time. Julius II had his own plans for the Sistine Chapel frescoes, images of the 12 apostles. Michelangelo dismissed the idea as a poor thing. Pope Sixtus commissioned early Renaissance painters including Botticelli to fresco the two long walls of the chapel. One side tells the story of Moses, the other the story of Christ. Even without Michelangelo's work, these earlier paintings still represent one of Europe's greatest fresco themes. Fresco painting is when you apply a coating of plaster to a wall, and before it dries completely, you paint on top of it. As the plaster dries, the colors are absorbed into the plaster, making it last forever. The downside is that if you make a mistake, you need to break the plaster and start all over again. Before Michelangelo began his work, the chapel's ceiling featured a depiction of the night sky, blue with a few gold stars. Michelangelo began work on the ceiling in July 1508. The completed frescoes were unveiled in October 1512. The chapel's paintings cover 12,000 square feet, or 1,110 square meters. Contrary to popular belief, Michelangelo did not paint on his back, but on a platform he devised that extended over half the area of the chapel and allowed him to stand upright. It was moved midway through the project. At no point could Michelangelo look at the work in progress from below, but he was able to paint images on a vast scale from a distance of a few inches. Michelangelo decided to decorate the ceiling with 9 scenes from the Old Testament. The most famous is the creation of Adam, which shows God descending from heaven to bring Adam to life. The main panels at the center of the ceiling depict stories from the book of Genesis to the story of Noah. However, Michelangelo painted the panels in reverse chronological order, finishing with the scene showing God created the sun, moon, earth, and darkness and light. Michelangelo claimed that he deliberately left the images of God until last, when his fresco technique would have improved, knowing that they would be the most challenging and wanting to excel in his portrayal of the divine. Michelangelo's portrayal of God as a muscular figure with long white hair and big white beard is the one many of us imagine, yet this was the first time God had been depicted in this way. In most earlier paintings, God was depicted simply as a hand reaching down through the clouds. God is depicted 6 times in the ceiling frescoes. Christ does not feature as an adult because the ceiling is concerned only with the Old Testament. The Bible suggests that Eve's forbidden fruit is an apple. In the ceiling panel depicting the temptation, Michelangelo's tree is a fig. The serpent in this scene, Satan, is depicted not as a male figure, but with a woman's head. The Sistine Chapel's frescoed ceiling has held up remarkably well in the 5 centuries since its completion. Only one small component is missing, part of the sky in the panel depicting Noah's escape from the great biblical flood. That section of painted plaster fell to the floor and shattered following an explosion at a nearby gunpowder depot in 1797. As we have seen, the walls of the chapel are almost completely covered with paintings. The most famous is the Last Judgment on the altar wall, also from Michelangelo. It was commissioned by Pope Paul III. Michelangelo painted the vast fresco of the Last Judgment long after the ceiling frescoes, from 1536 to 1541. It is a depiction of the second coming of Christ and the final and eternal judgment by God of all humanity. The souls of humans rise from their graves and descend to their fates, as judged by Christ, who is surrounded by prominent saints. In the upper part, the inhabitants of heaven are joined by the newly saved. Altogether, there are over 300 figures, with nearly all the males and angels originally shown as nudes. In 1564, the Council of Trent demanded that the more prominent nudes in the Last Judgment be made more decent. The artist Daniel da Volterra was commissioned to paint underwear or draperies on the offending nudes. He was lampooned ever after and given the nickname Big Pants. At the center of the work is a beardless Christ, shown as the individual verdicts of the Last Judgment are pronounced. He looks down toward the damned. Here is the raised hand, where the resurrected Christ reveals the wounds of his crucifixion. To the left of Christ is his mother, the Virgin Mary, who turns her head to look down towards the saved, though her pose also suggests resignation. Surrounding Christ are large numbers of figures, the saints and other saved souls. John the Baptist is on the left, and on the right St. Peter, holding the keys of heaven, and perhaps offering them back to Christ, as they will no longer be needed. Other prominent saints include St. Bartholomew. His face is usually recognized as being a self-portrait of Michelangelo. A boat rowed by Charon, who ferried souls to the underworld in classical mythology and Dante, brings souls to land beside the entrance to hell. He is threatening them with his oar. Satan, the traditional Christian devil, is not shown. In the center above Charon is a group of angels on clouds, 7 of them blowing trumpets as in the book of Revelation, others holding books that record the names of the saved and damned. Between 1980 and 1999, experts restored selected artwork in the Sistine Chapel, including Michelangelo's ceiling and the Last Judgment. Specialists meticulously dissolve layers of grime, soot, and deposits, substantially brightening the colors of the centuries-old paintings. What you're about to see are some of the highlights of the Vatican Museums, but please keep in mind that there are 13 museums here, comprising 2 Vatican palaces, and it would take several days if not weeks to really see everything. In fact, the route along the museums is 4.4 miles or 7 kilometers long. What started as just a small collection of sculptures has over the centuries transformed into a museum complex featuring one of the finest collections of art on the planet. The Vatican Museums were founded under the patronage of 2 18th century popes, Clement XIV and Pius VI, who were among the first to open collections of art to the general public for viewing. The 262-foot-long Gallery of the Candelabra contains many ancient Roman copies of Greek statues from the 2nd and 3rd century BC, but the ceiling, painted from 1883 to 1887, is an attraction too. The gallery's name comes from the massive marble candelabra that were placed in front of the pillars in 1761 when this was an open loggia, along with the marble columns that divide the exhibition area into 6 sections. Arranged under Pope Pius VI between 1785 and 1788, the gallery was renovated during the time of Pope Leo XIII at the end of the 19th century, and this is the decoration we see today. The Gallery of Tapestries features 27 tapestries belonging to 2 different periods. On one side are tapestries woven in Rome by the Barberini workshop and featuring important moments in the life of the Barberini Pope Urban VIII. On the other side are tapestries woven in the 16th century by the Flemish workshop of Peter van Elst, the best in Europe during the Renaissance period, based on cartoons by Raphael and his pupils and depicting episodes from the life of Christ. Each tapestry took at least 9 years to finish and were woven in gold thread, silk, and wool. Many of them originally hung in the Sistine Chapel. The longest gallery is the Gallery of Maps. In the 16th century, when popes seldom ventured out of Rome, Gregory XIII commissioned giant maps depicting all of Italy so he can explore his territory from the Alps to the Adriatic Sea. The resulting gallery housed 40 frescoes stretching from floor to ceiling across the length of a football field, the largest collection of geographical paintings ever created. The walls of this gallery are decorated with large paintings of maps created by Antonio Danti between 1580 and 1583. His brother Ignazio Danti, an architect and cosmographer, provided the necessary information. The maps show Italian cities, islands in the Mediterranean Sea, and papal territories. Ceiling frescoes depict events that took place in these locations. The beautifully decorated Room of the Immaculate Conception was created following the proclamation of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception by Pius IX, which took place on December 8, 1854, and which formalized the belief that the Virgin Mary was conceived without sin. The pontiff decided to celebrate the event with a cycle of frescoes. The task was assigned to Francesco Podesti. The artist, along with his team of workers, worked on the room from 1856 to 1865. The room underwent an extensive restoration in 2007. In 1867, it was decided to commission a bookcase to be positioned in the center of the room to hold the translations of the proclamation by Pius IX. The work is from a Parisian design workshop, which produced it between 1874 and 1878. The bookcase was financed largely through donations by a team of artists and craftsmen: ivory workers, sculptors, masters of metal chasing, painters, mosaic artists, ceramic workers, and goldsmiths, each of whom were engaged in the production of a specific type of item. The 110 volumes containing the manuscript text are now held in the Vatican Apostolic Library, and the bookcase now contains copies. The pictorial decoration proceeds from the ceiling with allegorical scenes alluding to the virtues of the Virgin. This large fresco is devoted to the proclamation of dogma in St. Peter's Basilica. This is the coronation of the image of Mary in a choir chapel in the Vatican, an event following the proclamation. Podesti, who was present, included a self-portrait here. In this fresco, theologians are discussing the history of the Immaculate Conception. The Raphael rooms were commissioned by Pope Julius II, who preferred to distance himself from Alexander VI and thus refused to reside in the apartments created for his predecessor. He planned on inviting a variety of renowned master painters to decorate his own private apartments, but after seeing the work of the 25-year-old Renaissance painter and architect Raphael, he decided instead to entrust the work to him. From 1508 on, Raphael worked on and off on the decoration of the apartments, often distracted by his other work, including the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. Raphael died in 1520, before the frescoes of the papal apartments were complete, but his assistants finished the work following his designs. The frescoes are considered masterpieces of Renaissance art. The Room of the Fire was named after one of the frescoes. The room was decorated from 1514 to 1517, mostly by Raphael's assistants during the pontificate of Pope Leo X. He chose the lives of his namesakes Leo III and Leo IV as the theme for the room. The most important fresco is the Fire in the Borgo, which was painted after a sketch created by Raphael. It shows Leo IV extinguishing a fire by making the sign of a cross. The Battle of the Ostia, which in 849 AD saw the troops of Pope Leo IV opposed to the Arabs, celebrates the miraculous victory of the papal armies and also refers to the crusade against the infidels encouraged by Pope Leo X. The Coronation of Charlemagne is a painting by the workshop of Raphael. Though it is believed that Raphael did make the designs for the composition, the fresco was probably painted by John Francesco Penny. The painting shows how Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III on Christmas evening, 800 AD. The oath of Leo III took place on December 23, 800 AD, when Pope Leo III took an oath of purgation or cleansing concerning charges brought against him by the nephews of his predecessor, Pope Hadrian I, who had accused him of misconduct. The assembled bishops declared that they could not judge the Pope, after which Leo took the oath of his own free will. The Room of Heliodorus was partly carried out by Raphael between 1512 and 1514. The theme of the room is a divine intervention in protecting the church and saints. The Mass at Bolsena depicts a miracle that is said to have taken place in 1263 at the Church of Santa Cristina in Bolsena. A Bohemian priest who doubted a church doctrine was celebrating Mass at Bolsena when the bread of the Eucharist began to bleed. It's a painting by Raphael and was painted between 1512 and 1514. The meeting of Leo the Great and Attila depicts the important meeting between the Pope and the Hun conqueror and includes the legendary images of St. Peter and St. Paul in the sky bearing swords. Raphael and his assistant Giulio Romano painted it in 1514. The Room of the Segnatura is named after a special committee that gathered here. Raphael started with this room in 1508, and it's the only room that was completely painted by the master himself. The subject is the harmony between the values of the antiquity or ancient past and Christianity. The first composition Raphael executed between 1509 and 1510 was the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament, the traditional name for what is really an adoration of the sacrament. In the painting, Raphael created an image of the church, which is presented as spanning both heaven and earth. Raphael completed the second composition between 1509 and 1511. It represents the Parnassus, the dwelling place of the god Apollo and the Muses, and the home of poetry according to classical myth. In the fresco, Apollo and the Muses are surrounded by poets from antiquity and Raphael's own time. The two scenes on the fourth wall executed by the workshop, and the lunette above it containing the cardinal virtues, were painted in 1511. The cardinal virtues allegorically presents the virtues of fortitude, prudence, and temperance, alongside charity, faith, and hope. The chapel of Urban VIII came into being in 1631, when architects, upon request by Pope Urban VIII Barberini, adapted a small room for services, surmounting it with a vault with lunettes and decorating it with ornate gilded stucco. This small space became the private chapel of the old apartment. The frescoes depict various stories relating to Christ. The original appearance of the walls is unknown. They are now decorated with stamped leather from the Vatican Apostolic Palace and mounted in the chapel, probably during the second half of the 19th century. The antique leather wall coverings were made of goat, sheep, or calf skins and with silver and tin leaf. The unique gilded appearance was obtained by applying transparent yellow paints across the entire surface, which made the most of the shininess of the metal leaf, thus simulating the effect of gold. The Borgia apartments are a series of rooms that were converted into private apartments for Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo de Borgia. The Pope was a patron of the arts, and he called upon Pinturicchio to decorate the rooms with magnificent frescoes. Between 1492 and 1495, Pinturicchio and his pupils painted 6 of the Borgia rooms. The frescoes depict religious and medieval themes. Most of the rooms are currently used to display a selection of the collection of modern religious art.
and welcome to Rome, Italy.
Ein herzliches Willkommen allen deutschsprachigen Pilgern und Besuchern zu dieser Audienz von Papst Franziskus. Heute sind die folgenden Gruppen gemeldet: Münster sowie Pilgergruppen aus den Städten Erfurt, Friedolfing und Württembergischer Christusbund, Pflegedienstleiter. Zudem sind folgende Schülergruppen gemeldet: aus dem Marie-Curie-Gymnasium Düsseldorf.
Buenos días. Damos la bienvenida a los visitantes y peregrinos de lengua española que participan en esta audiencia. Además de pequeños grupos familiares venidos de España y Latinoamérica, están aquí presentes. Asociación COCENFE Castilla-La Mancha de la Diócesis de Albacete. Colegio Cristo Crucificado de Valverde de Leganés. Colegios Mercedarios, Provincia de Castilla. Grupo de Peregrinos de Guadalajara.
Além das pessoas e famílias vindas por conta própria, participam nesta audiência os seguintes grupos do Brasil: Associação, grupos de peregrinos de Minas Gerais, Florianópolis, Porto Alegre.
وبخاصة إلى سفير جمهورية مصر العربية لدى إيطاليا مع جميع العاملين في السفارة، وإلى وفد المؤمنين الأقباط القادمين من أبرشية الأقصر.
Il Santo Padre dà ora inizio all'udienza generale, che introdurrà con il segno della croce e il saluto liturgico. Prepariamoci ad ascoltare la sua parola e a ricevere la sua benedizione.
In nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Pace sia con voi.
Con il tuo spirito. Seid habt Christus angezogen. Wort des lebendigen Gottes.
Lectura de la carta de San Pablo a los Gálatas. Hermanos, todos sois hijos de Dios por la fe en Cristo Jesús. Cuantos habéis sido bautizados en Cristo, os habéis revestido de Cristo.
Spirituali di questo sacramento, invisibili agli occhi ma operativi nel cuore di chi è diventato nuova creatura, sono esplicitati dalla consegna della veste bianca e della candela accesa. Dopo il lavacro di rigenerazione, capace di ricreare l'uomo secondo Dio nella vera santità, è parso naturale fin dai primi secoli un rivestire i neobattizzati di una veste nuova e per questo dai primi secoli il battesimo anche si chiamava l'illuminazione e quello che era battezzato era detto l'illuminato. Infatti i bambini rinati nel battesimo riceveranno la pienezza del dono dello Spirito nella confimazione e parteciperanno all'Eucaristia.
Les pèlerins de langue française sont heureux de vous exprimer leurs sentiments respectueux et leur filial attachement. Ils vous assurent de leur prière pour votre personne et pour votre ministère de successeur de Pierre.
Sia feconda in ciascuno di voi e sostenga il vostro cammino di santità. Dio vi benedica.
Nous saluons en italien, le Saint-Père vient de dire.
The Holy Father will then impart his apostolic blessing, which he willingly extends to the members of your families at home. His Holiness also intends to bless any religious articles you may have brought for this purpose, and in a special way, his blessing goes to all children and young people, the elderly and sick, and those recently married. The following is a summary of the Holy Father's words this morning. Dear brothers and sisters, in this, our final catechesis on baptism, we turn to the rites illustrating the grace of the sacrament.
L'amore misericordioso di Dio nostro Padre. Signore vi benedica.
I greet all the English-speaking pilgrims and visitors taking part in today's audience, particularly those from Scotland, Ireland, Egypt, Mauritius, Indonesia, Canada, and the United States of America. In the joy of the risen Christ, I invoke upon you and your families the loving mercy of God our Father. May the Lord bless you all.
Für Ihren apostolischen Dienst als Hirte der universalen Kirche.
Sul nostro cammino incontro al Signore condividiamo con tutti i fratelli e le sorelle.
En esta audiencia desean manifestarle cordialmente sus sentimientos de filial afecto, que acompañan con fervientes oraciones por sus intenciones de pastor de toda la Iglesia.
Porque el Espíritu Santo da la fuerza necesaria para alcanzar la santidad en medio de las circunstancias que le toca vivir cada día. Que Dios los bendiga. Muchas gracias.
Conserva immaculada até a vida eterna.
Rivolgo un cordiale saluto ai pellegrini di lingua portoghese, in particolare ai pensionati. Dio vi benedica e la Vergine Madre vi protegga. Grazie. L'Istituto Superiore Universitario de Scienze Psicopedagogiche e Sociali di Viterbo.
Et cum spiritu tuo,
Sin nomen Domini benedictum,
ex hoc nunc et usque in seculum,
aiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
qui feci celum et terra.
Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen.
Shall I meet you in the
Here comes the Pope.
Bye, see you there. Bye.
The Castel Sant'Angelo, which means Castle of the Holy Angel, was originally built in the 2nd century as a mausoleum for Emperor Hadrian. It housed the remains of Hadrian and many of his successors. It eventually became part of the city wall and later was turned into a fortress before it functioned as a papal residence and finally as a barracks and military prison. Today it's a national museum. The mausoleum was connected to the city by the Pons Aelius, or Bridge of Hadrian. The bridge is now known as the Ponte Sant'Angelo. The bridge was designed by the personal architect to Emperor Hadrian and was completed in 134 AD. Contrary to popular belief, the bridge was actually created before Hadrian's mausoleum. The 10 statues, which each bear a symbol of the suffering and death of Christ, were designed by Italian master sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini and added during the 17th century. He personally sculpted 2 of the statues, but the originals were later moved to a church near the Spanish Steps. Now, before we take a tour of the Castel Sant'Angelo, here are some fun facts about Rome.
So what I want to do now is give a little history of Rome, how Rome got its name, how Rome got its nickname, and how the Roman Empire became so vast, and then what caused the end of the Roman Empire. So first, how did Rome get its name? Well, legend has it that 2 twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, when they were infants or children, they were abandoned by the river Tiber. And both Romulus and Remus were brought up by a she-wolf. And at one point when they became adults, they were looking to found a new city, and legend has it that Romulus decided to kill his twin brother Remus and name the city after himself, so Romulus became Rome. Now, how did Rome get its nickname, the Eternal City? Well, the Roman Empire was so vast that Romans didn't think it would ever end. So basically they thought it would go on for eternity, hence the name the Eternal City. Now, in terms of the vastness of the Roman Empire, why was it so successful? One big reason is that the Roman army was a professional fighting force. That was their job. So they were really good at what they did, and they were able to conquer all their enemies and expand the empire, which, by the way, was through most of Europe, the Balkans, the Mediterranean, and parts of the Middle East. That's how big it was. Another reason why they were so successful is for the first time they built new infrastructure. And for example, you see aqueducts everywhere in not just Italy, but in Turkey, in Spain, and many parts of Europe. And they were able to connect cities and towns using different engineering feats, including aqueducts. So what happened to the Roman Empire? Why did it eventually fall apart? There's many reasons. One is there was political corruption. Another reason is there was over-reliance on slave labor. Another reason is there were a lot of mercenaries that were fighting for the Romans, but they had no allegiance to Rome or the Roman army. And a lot of times they would actually turn against their Roman superiors. And eventually that did in the Roman Empire. Another reason is Christianity was becoming more and more important, which means that the Roman generals were becoming less and less important as far as their influence was concerned. So the Roman Empire lasted about 500 years, and I think it ended around 500-600 AD perhaps. But what we see today all over Rome are the remnants of the Roman Empire, and it's pretty amazing some of the history that is here. And I have to say, it's one thing about reading about history in textbooks when you're in school, but it's another thing to stand in a place where history took place, whether you're at the Roman Forum, the Colosseum, the Vatican, or in back of me, the Castel Sant'Angelo, which we're about to enter. So anyway, I hope that was informative, and we'll see you soon.
So we're here at the Castel Sant'Angelo, which is the original mausoleum of Hadrian. And this is one of the buildings in Rome. There's a lot of original elements to it, as you can see, because it looks pretty darn old. This is the bastion of San Marco, which was built in the 15th century to complete the transformation of Hadrian's mausoleum to a fortress. It got its present look in the 17th century when it was adapted for use with heavy artillery. Yeah, it looks cool. Is that like a big slingshot?
What was this?
It looks like a prison for small people. Or I should say vertically challenged people. This is the bastion of San Giovanni. What I like about this is that the people back then were pretty short, just like me. Ooh! What do we got here? Some cannons. Some of the old weapons.
Yeah, this is the guard room. A few steps further.
We're now in the center of the ancient Hadrian's mausoleum. The Courtyard of Honor, also known as the Angel's Courtyard, gives you access to the papal apartments which were built in the 15th century. This angel statue, which originally topped the Castel Sant'Angelo and was made by Raffaello da Montelupo, an apprentice of Michelangelo, is now located here.
Pero si quieres, ahorita te las elimino, que no queda. Pones seleccionar. Coges cuál.
The upper armory consists of 4 adjoining rooms containing weapons that house a collection of over 6,000 pieces. The first room is devoted to the Risorgimento, the movement that led to Italy's unity and independence. This room includes uniforms from the mid-19th century. The This second room contains weapons with ivory, silver, and wooden inlays that were made at the end of the 16th century by the influential Farnese family. The Grand Loggia was completed in 1543 at the behest of Pope Paul III, who was born Alessandro Farnese. He was the Counter-Reformation Pope, who organized the Church's answer to Martin Luther's Protestant Reform movement. He also commissioned Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. The library is the main room in one of the two apartments that Paul III built in the 1540s. The room provided access to the papal archives. This is the Treasury room. However, some believe it was a hall where funeral ceremonies took place for emperors. It was also possibly used as a treasury, although it most likely housed papal archives instead of gold. This room was also built by Pope Paul III in the 1540s. The frieze depicts a procession of tritons and dancing sea nymphs, as well as male and female figures alternating with unicorns. Originally, the room had a gold and silver painted ceiling, but it was destroyed by fire from a fireworks display. This room was originally built in 1543 and was the upper floor of Paul III's loggia.
You can tell by how narrow these stairs are that people were much smaller back then.
The round room was the site of the first medieval chapel dedicated to the Archangel Michael in the castle. The Hall of Columns was built under the papacy of Benedict XIV Lambertini in order to contain the new archive. Tables were placed here for archivists. The windows were equipped with removable doors to prevent damage from fireworks on the terrace above. On July 4, 1798, the documents were hastily transferred to the Vatican, where they currently remain, due to the French occupation. In 1799, all the furniture was destroyed. We're now standing on the Angel Terrace. From the Angel Terrace, you can get some great views of Rome. This is St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. This is the secret passageway to the Vatican, known as the Passetto di Borgo. Two popes in particular are known to have used this passage in times of peril. Pope Alexander VI fled the Vatican via the Passetto in 1494, seeking security in Castel Sant'Angelo when Charles VIII of France invaded Italy in the Italian War of 1494. In 1527, Pope Clement VII was able to escape the sack of Rome via the Passetto when Holy Roman Emperor Charles V invaded Rome with his army, killing all but 42 of the 189 Swiss guards on duty.
I believe that is the Vittorio Emmanuel II monument. Right there. There's the river Tiber or Tiber.
This is a statue of an angel built by the 18th century Flemish sculptor Peter Verschaffelt. The bronze statue replaced an earlier marble version. The statue depicts the Archangel Michael, who according to legend, appeared on top of the fortress in the year 590 AD, and miraculously ended the severe plague that had infested the city of Rome. After this event, the building was renamed Castel Sant'Angelo, literally translated St. Angel Castle or Castle of the Holy Angel, in honor of the Archangel. This is one of my favorite rooms in the Castel Sant'Angelo. It was Paul III's entertaining room in his apartment. It was decorated between 1545 and 1547 and was designed to be lavish, to show the dominance of the Roman Church. On the ceiling we can see Paul III's coat of arms and episodes of the life of Alexander the Great. The Perseus Chamber is Paul III's studio, one of the private rooms in the apartments. It was built in the 1540s. The name comes from the subject of the frieze painting, which was made from 1545 to 1546. Perseus is the mythological hero who defeated the Medusa, and the frieze depicts his adventures. This is the bedroom of Paul III called the Cupid and Psyche room. The name is based on the subject of the frieze, the story of Cupid and Psyche. Cupid was the son of Venus. The Hall of Apollo is the main hall on the first floor of the papal apartments, built by Niccolo V. The large barrel-vaulted hall owes its name to the cycle of frescoes that Paul III had made in 1547. The frescoes executed on the vault include a grotesque decoration and 10 panels depicting the stories of Apollo as executioner and inspirer of wisdom. So this is some of the original flooring. The atrium is the entrance to Hadrian's mausoleum and is made of large blocks of travertine, originally covered with marble slabs, now lost. The large niche in the background housed a large statue of Emperor Hadrian. Funeral processions were held here. Well, that's the end of the tour. If you're planning a visit to Rome, there's plenty of history and mystery to make the Castel Sant'Angelo worth a visit.
I am Andy Teach, host of Andy's Awesome Adventures, and welcome to Rome, Italy.
Welcome to the Piazza del Popolo. The Piazza del Popolo, or People's Square, was our final stop in Rome before heading to Florence. The main reason I came here was to see the Sistine Chapel, which was the first altar of science, Earth, in the Tom Hanks movie Angels and Demons. Unfortunately, the chapel, located in the Santa Maria del Popolo and created by Raphael, wasn't open until later in the day, so we had to skip it. I'm glad we came here, though, because the square features some beautiful architecture and historically was the main entrance to the Roman Empire. Interestingly, across the centuries, Piazza del Popolo became the main stage for public executions, the last of which occurred in 1826. The Santa Maria del Popolo was built over the tomb of Emperor Nero in 1477 at the site of an 11th century chapel. Rumor has it that the church is haunted by the ghost of the emperor, and evil spirits are disturbing the residents living close to it. The church contains many impressive works of art, including Rome's oldest stained glass windows. In 1562, Pope Pius IV commissioned architect Nanni Baccio Biggio to construct a large gate, the Porta Flaminia, to impress the pilgrims who entered the city through the Via Flaminia. In 1655, on the occasion of Queen Christina of Sweden's arrival in Rome, the inside of the gate was decorated by Bernini on Pope Alexander VII's request. The gate was later renamed Porta del Popolo. In 1589, Pope Sixtus V had the Egyptian obelisk of Seti I and his son Ramses II moved from Circus Maximus to the center of the square. The 73-foot-tall obelisk was originally built around 1300 BC and stood at the Sun Temple in Heliopolis. In 10 BC, the Roman Emperor Augustus had the obelisk transported all the way to Rome. The obelisk was erected at the Circus Maximus to commemorate the conquest of Egypt, and it's one of 13 ancient Egyptian obelisks in Rome. From 1815 to 1816, Giuseppe Valadier redesigned the Piazza del Popolo by adding walls around the square, giving the piazza its current oval shape. He also added the central fountain and the 4 Egyptian lions around the obelisk. Italian sculptor Giovanni Ceccarini was responsible for the creation of the 2 marble fountains, and he worked on the statues from 1818 to 1824. The fountain on the western end of the square is the Fontana del Nettuno, Neptune Fountain, and shows Neptune accompanied by tritons. The fountain opposite the Neptune Fountain, at the foot of the Pincio Gardens, is known as the Fontana della Dea di Roma, Fountain of the Goddess of Rome. The central figure is the goddess Rome, flanked by allegorical figures representing the rivers Tiber and Anune. Below the goddess is a statue of a she-wolf suckling Remus and Romulus, founder of Rome. At the southern end of the square, 2 symmetrical churches on either side of the Via del Corso, the Santa Maria de Miracoli and the Santa Maria in Monte Santo, were commissioned by Pope Alexander VII in 1658. They were both designed by Carlo Rinaldi, but the Santa Maria di Miracoli was finished by Bernini. Some call them twin churches, but the churches are not identical, since the surface area of the land provided for the Santa Maria in Monte Santo on the left was smaller. In order to give the impression of symmetry, Rinaldi created an oval dome for this church and a circular dome for the Santa Maria di Miracoli. When you think of Rome, do you think of the Mouth of Truth in the Santa Maria in Cosmedin? Circus Maximus? The Victor Emmanuel II Monument? Or the Theatre of Marcellus? And yet, while these sites are off the beaten path, they are still worth seeing. This is the Basilica of Santa Maria in Cosmedin. The Basilica is one of the best examples of medieval architecture in Rome. However, many visitors come here to see the famous Bocca della Verita, a large marble disc that was used in the Middle Ages as a lie detector and was placed here in 1632. Beginning in the Middle Ages, it was believed that if one told a lie with his hand in the mouth of the sculpture, it would be bitten off. The Bocca della Verita looks like a manhole and is thought to be part of an ancient Roman temple, and the face is believed to be that of the god Oceanus. Aside from the Bocca della Verita, the church is especially renowned for its beautiful cosmatesque artwork. The interior work was done by the Cosmedin, a Roman family of skillful architects, sculptors, and tile workers. The cosmatesque mosaic style was established in the 12th century, and much of the work was done by the family in the 12th and 13th centuries. It began with the work of Lorenzo Cosmedin and was developed by the next 4 generations of Cosmedin architects and sculptors. Of special note is the canopy, done in Gothic style with cosmatesque decoration. It dates to 1294 and is signed by Diodato da Cosma. This is reputed to be the skull of St. Valentine, the patron saint of love. The skull was discovered during an excavation of a catacomb that took place in Rome in the early 1800s. The history of the church of Santa Maria in Cosmedin goes back to the 6th century, when a small church was built at the site of the administrative office of the grain market. In this area stood several temples. The small church was originally served by Greek and Byzantine monks. In the 8th century, the church was expanded by Pope Adrian I. Remains of a crumbling temple were incorporated into the new apse. The basilica now had 3 naves instead of a single one. The interior was so beautiful that the church was given the name Cosmedin, a word that was derived from the Greek word for jewel. This is the chapel of Our Lady of Loreto. They show the birth of Our Lady on the left and her death on the right. In a conch, she is shown holding the Christ child in front of the Holy House, where tradition says she was taken by angels from Nazareth to Loreto. We're now going down to the crypt, where I expect to see some bones. Pope Hadrian's crypt was built in the 8th century. The crypt itself is a miniature basilica with 6 columns. The niches on both sides probably held funeral urns. Santa Maria in Cosmedin. It's a crypt. I thought crypts supposed to have bones. Were they all here? Well, I want to see them. I guess not. Sorry, folks. I see no bones. This is Circus Maximus. Not Circus from Las Vegas. This is Circus Maximus. This is where they had the chariot races more than 2,000 years ago. And today it doesn't look like much, but you can kind of picture the horse-drawn chariots going all the way down there. Now, it has its origins going back to the 6th century BC, when the King of Rome created a track between the Palatine and the Aventine Hills. And the first permanent starting gates were around 329 BC. In 174 BC, the gates were rebuilt and 7 wooden eggs were placed on top of the spina, the central wall in the arena. The eggs were used to count the number of laps. After each lap, 1 egg was removed. In 33 BC, 7 bronze dolphins were added to the spina for the same purpose. A fire in 31 BC, the first of 3, destroyed the wooden structure. It was rebuilt by Emperor Augustus. A large obelisk from Heliopolis was added to the spina as a decoration. The obelisk can now be found at the center of the Piazza del Popolo. A second fire in 64 AD, which started in wooden shops at the bottom around the track, started the fire that burned much of Rome during the reign of Emperor Nero. After yet another fire, the circus was rebuilt by Trajan in 103 AD. At this point, the Circus Maximus was now a stone construction 3 stories high. The lower part of the cavea, or seating area, was built in marble. So back then they would have betting on the races. There were also gladiators fighting as well, but they would have betting on the races, and it became so intense that the different factions would actually fight against each other, sometimes resulting in death. So again, Circus Maximus. I think of Ben-Hur when I'm here. Officially known as the Monumento Nazionale a Vittorio Emanuele, the enormous white marble monument that dominates Piazza Venezia was built as a tribute to the first king of a united Italy, Victor Emmanuel II. As king of Sardinia and victor over the Austrian army in Lombardy, Victor Emmanuel had become a symbol of the Risorgimento, the movement for a united Italy. After his army joined forces with Garibaldi and defeated the Papal army, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed in 1861 with Victor Emmanuel as king. In 1885, construction of the monument started, which was based on a design by Giuseppe Sacconi, winner of an architectural contest. The northern slope of the Capitoline Hill was cleared to make way for the monument, as Roman ruins and medieval churches were destroyed in the process. Sacconi never saw his monument completed. He died in 1905 and was succeeded by 3 architects. The new monument, a national symbol of Italy, was inaugurated in 1911 at the 50th anniversary of the kingdom. The monument to Victor Emmanuel II, also known as the Altare della Patria, or Altar of the Nation, is built with white marble. It is decorated with numerous allegorical statues, reliefs, and murals created by artists from all over the country. The upper section of the monument consists of a massive curved colonnade with 50-foot tall columns, framed on either side by small temple-like wings with a classical front. At the center of the monument is the large equestrian statue of Victor Emmanuel, the father of the nation. The statue rests on a pedestal decorated with allegorical reliefs representing Italian cities. Although you can't see it here, at the foot of the statue is a tomb of the unknown soldier, which was inaugurated in 1921. Two bronze horse-drawn chariots crown the monument, each with a statue of a winged victory. The one on the right represents freedom, while the one on the left represents unity. They were added in 1927, 16 years after the monument was inaugurated. Inside the monument are large rooms. Half of those are used for exhibitions. The other half houses a museum dedicated to the history of the unification of Italy. Personally, I think this is a very majestic building, but the Victor Emmanuel Monument is not exactly known as one of Rome's most beautiful structures. It is considered too monumental by some, and the bright white color does not fit well into the color of its surroundings. The monument has been given nicknames such as typewriter and wedding cake. The Theatre of Marcellus, with its seating capacity of approximately 15,000 spectators, was the largest and most important open-air theatre in Rome. It was completed in the 1st century BC during the reign of Augustus, although the building project was begun by Julius Caesar. The architecture of the theatre would become a standard feature of theatres across the empire and influence the facades of such iconic buildings as the Colosseum. In its heyday, the theatre hosted such cultural events as plays, musical contests, and poetry recitals. However, with the increasing popularity of circuses and gladiator games held in the Circus Maximus and Colosseum, the theatre fell into disuse. In 13 BC, the emperor dedicated the theatre to his nephew Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who had been his heir prior to his early death in 23 BC. To make room for the theatre, the ancient Flaminian Circus was demolished, and the temple of Apollo was moved a few feet. Today, 3 columns, the podium, and front stairs of the temple can be seen next to the theatre. The first events held at the theatre were the secular games of 17 BC, but it was not officially inaugurated until about 5 years later. In the 4th century, material from the theatre was used in other building projects. The monument, like many other buildings, suffered in later times, especially during the 11th and 12th centuries when it was converted into a fortress.